This episode of The Answer is Yes brought to you by Baja Bound Insurance Services. Driving to Mexico? You can buy and print out your Mexican auto insurance policy online in minutes with their easy-to-use website. They also have great travel information to help you plan your trip south of the border. Visit BajaBound.com.
Hello, and thanks for joining us on Live Life Driven Podcast. Hope everybody's doing well out there. You know, as I usually say, this show is about things that I've learned through the week, or little tidbits that can help you in your life and directions that you want to go, choices you want to make. It's been very challenging this year with all the things going on in the world, but I believe in you and your opportunities that are right there in front of you if you can take advantage of them or just look around, get out of your comfort zone. Today I have Cindi Grace on the line, who was introduced to me by David Meltzer. Cindi, how are you today?
I'm great. Thanks very much for having me on your show, and I'd like to thank David for introducing us. It's going to be great.
He's such a wonderful person. He's got a huge, vast network. He continues to push great people my way, so I'm equally grateful for him and his willingness to make these introductions. I read through an email that you sent me about some of your history, and I just was so intrigued about your career path. Would you mind just giving us a little background for my audience, where you spent the last, 40 years of employment?
Yeah, it's quite unusual to spend 40 years in one place. I started out working for Western Digital, which is the company I spent my career at, back in the early 80s when I was in high school as a temporary employee. And through a bunch of different circumstances, I decided that I wanted to work there and put myself through college as I was working there. And so I would, just to summarize it, I started out as a literature girl, sending out pamphlets to our distributors on the product lines that we had to offer, and putting chips into rails for product samples for people. And over a long period of time, was able to move from that place to where I was ultimately managing the P&L and the business for one of our largest business units in the company. I don't know where you'd like me to start from there, but there's a lot of trial and error in doing that. And I had the opportunity to work for many different leaders, see a lot of different leadership styles. The company went through many different, trials and tribulations, lots of times hanging on the brink of disaster, and, other times being wildly successful. But the company changed itself 4 different times. I say I really worked for 4 different companies. When we started, we were building chips for TI calculators, and ultimately became one of the largest storage provider in the industry.
Wow. Now, you talk about, this was no small company, by the way. You talked about it grew organically from $1 billion to $5 billion, and then through acquisition up to $10 billion.
Yeah, the company ultimately became somewhere between 16 and 20. It's very cyclical in the storage and semiconductor business, and so you have some highs and lows based on, economic factors. But yes, the company, when I started working there, I don't even know what the revenue was because I was just so new to the business, but very, very small. And today is one of the most successful companies in the storage industry.
Yeah, you talk a little bit about as well, and I think it's a little bit of slap humor about, being the girl and working amongst your male peers and some of the challenges of being that person and overcoming that and building a great team. Can you expand on that a little bit?
Sure. I think I was very fortunate to have a mentor whose name was Kathy Braun, and she was the first female president or the only female president of Western Digital back in the mid 90s, which was really unusual. When I think back on it now, I can't think of another female who was leading a business at that, in tech of that size. Mm-hmm. And she taught me that, anything was possible. I remember seeing, this little tiny 4'11" woman walking around leading all these men, and she was always the only woman at the table, but always very articulate. Everybody had a lot of respect for her and pretty true to herself. And so that her example showed me that you could do anything that you wanted to do, although not easy. And you had to give some things up, and you had to be willing to make some sacrifices in order to do it. It was she was a great example for me in terms of I knew what I wanted to be, and it was something I wanted to lead a business. and she showed me that that was possible. I also had the opportunity to work for several different leaders um, in my career. And I grew up in the company, so I learned a lot about, the different functions. Um, my first big lesson was be accessible and be willing to do different things. So I was always curious. I always made myself available to um, to different people in the business. I was very curious and offered myself up to take on different assignments. And I think that really worked in my favor because by the time I became a leader, I had worked in multiple functions in the company and had developed some credibility with my peers and particularly my male peers. I mean, even when I was starting in middle management, it was unusual to see a woman anywhere in the business. I remember, sitting in a room one day in an engineering meeting where one of the guys that worked for me looked over and said, "Do you realize that you're the only woman in this room with 70 people in it?"
Mm.
And I started to laugh and said, I really didn't until he brought that up to me because I'd put myself in a place where I didn't think about it anymore.
Yeah.
As a female, I think, we are different, and we have an onus upon ourselves to realize that and make our audience comfortable with us, whether it's a customer, whether it's your peer group. And I learned a lot about football. I learned a lot about sports. I wanted to be relevant to the team, and I wanted to make sure that when I was with them and participating, that they were thinking about me as an equal,
Hmm.
not as the wife at the dinner table or the girlfriend. And so I just did a lot of things to make myself be more relevant to them, and it worked out in my favor.
It's interesting, I'm in my mid 50s, so I was in business at the time where there weren't a lot of females. I feel now that there's many more females at the table, and I'm so grateful for that because I think that women add so much value to companies. But at the same time, I also feel that there is still a little bit of this, they have to, as you suggested, learn about football and all these other things to be relevant. Which, to a small degree is a little bit unfortunate, but I guess we all have to find some common ground and things to talk about. Do you have any advice for women now that are in business, that are sitting at that table, whether it's to maintain their relevance or to, enjoy the experience a little bit more than maybe what they are? Because I think oftentimes they're trying to prove a point still. And I think the point's been proven now. We know that women are oftentimes stronger, better, faster, and great at the job.
I think the most important lesson that I learned is be true to yourself and take those differences and make them, turn those into your opportunities or your positives. For me, what made me successful, or what I think was one of the things that made me successful, is when I started being true to myself, when I started to trust my gut, when I started to listen to my intuition, and be able to add some value in different perspectives. I mean, you have to understand the content of what's going on in any situation that you're in. But, for me, when I embraced the differences in myself, I became successful. I'll
Hmm.
give an example. When I first started leading a business and really going out there and working with customers and different teams, what I found was I wasn't going to be as successful in the Americas working with customers where there was a little bit of a gender bias. Um, but when I looked at Asia, for instance, the Asian culture is very different. In Asia, you hear about the tiger mommy. You hear about, the mother is really the revered figure in the Asian culture. And we had a lot of Asian customers. No one had really spent a lot of time there. And so I started spending a lot of time in Asia working with those customers. And as I did that, the bias has kind of disappeared. I worked with a lot of women over there. It gave me a lot of confidence and helped me to find the person that I was in order to be successful across, all of the globe, even with the American customers. I think for women today, what I would say is, be relevant, but be yourself. Have something to say. Make sure that what you're going to say is important to the team, but don't think about those differences so much. Think about what you can bring to the table. Uh, I'm sorry, what positives and what you can bring, as opposed to worrying about what's different.
I love the point you made a few minutes ago about you sitting at the table and you didn't even think about you being the only woman in the room because you only thought about what you were bringing to the business. And I feel like being in business, I've looked at my colleagues in the same manner where I didn't look at it as a color or a gender. I just looked at it as a team member. And I think we could all do and be a lot better if we consider our team members just that, not based on race or male female, because there's so much value that different people bring to the equation. And I guess that might be a nice lead-in to talk about diversity and some of your conversation and what you're going to be doing within diversity in business. You want to talk about that a little bit?
Sure. I think when I look at when I moved into leadership, I think one of the things that made my team very successful was that it was a really diverse team. I had a globally dispersed team. That wasn't always the acceptable norm. A lot of people do, a lot of control was had here in the Americas. But from my perspective, as I started to work around the world and with different kinds of people, I realized, when you're in Rome, do as the Romans do. I always thought it was silly that we had Americans managing Asians or Europeans. Why wouldn't we have Asians managing Asians? Why wouldn't we have Europeans managing Europeans? Why aren't we looking for the best person for the job? There tends to be a norm that people look at when they look at different positions in a company. But for me, looking outside of the box, looking for the best person for the job, regardless of how young they were, where they came from, what their background was super important. And so I had a very diverse team. I had a lot of women on my team. I had a lot of people from different cultures on my team. And I had a lot of people that weren't like me. My best number two, we were yin and yang, very different from me because they give you different perspectives. And those different perspectives are what make you, what I think make you better, and what makes, what really tunes your intuition into the business. As a leader, you need to understand your market and your customers and your objectives. Then you need to be able to paint a roadmap for your team of what that is. What are we trying to achieve? How are we going to get there? And once they understand that, getting out of their way and letting them do that, super important. And I found that through diversity, we tried a lot of different things that probably would not have come to mind had we just been, a bunch of me's sitting on the team. And I've had a lot of really good experiences as a result of that. And I think we've set, an example within the company and within the business of how things can be done a little bit differently. So as I move forward in my career, what I always said when I left, whenever I was going to leave Western Digital, I wanted to look back and leave a legacy where, women were being accepted in management. And as you said, that's become more and more acceptable today, where people felt like they can achieve their dreams as long as they're smart, committed, and willing to do the work to get there. And be comfortable that your differences sometimes are the things that make you better and unique. And so I want people to be comfortable taking a seat at the table. Sometimes they don't know how to find that, so I'm going to help them find it and then be successful in doing that.
I have a real quick story about diversity and how important it can be playing a role. I was on a marketing call a few weeks ago with a client. He's 94 years old, and myself in my 50s, the marketing leader in her 50s, and then a brand developer probably in his late 50s, talking about brand discovery and brand names and definitions and how to build this brand out. Now, the marketing company owner had an assistant on the Zoom call to take notes for the group. And intuitively, the 94-year-old said, "Hey, by the way, I know you're there to take notes, but what do you think?" And what came out of her mouth afterwards was absolutely incredible, not only for what she said, but the value that she brought to the conversation. And, it really makes you think like, wow, this person was only here to do something, I don't want to call it menial because it was important to take the notes, but all of a sudden she brought this tremendous value to the conversation that otherwise would not have happened. And I think the point of